Part 3. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 21. You looked at the handsome young man walking towards him and frowned inadvertently. And Bairuoxi also frowned slightly. It's not that Musian is not welcome, but she doesn't want him to come at this critical moment. Master Mu must have heard it outside just now. Do you have any unique insights on this matter? Yu's dark eyes looked particularly deep, staring at Musian. He has calmed down from his anger just now. Originally, when Bairuoxi invited him to the Bai mansion today, he was very happy, but who knew that after a few words, the other party gave him a letter of divorce. This also made Yu feel great humiliation. Obviously, he treated her so well in the past, but the other party invited him to the mansion to humiliate him. Obviously, Bairuoxi had never mentioned the matter of breaking the engagement in the past, and her attitude towards him had never been so cold, but since she had contact with Musian, Bairuoxi's attitude has become much colder. The reason why Bairuoxi wanted to break off the engagement was probably because she had taken a fancy to Musian. He now wanted to see what reason Musian had to defend Bairuoxi for the break-off engagement she gave him. No good opinion, but I do understand Miss Bai. Musian smiled. Yu frowned, stared at Musian, and said nothing. By the way, before that, I want to make one thing clear, Musian said, you and Miss Bai are not married, so you can't give her a divorce letter. At most, you agree to Miss Bai's break off the engagement. Yu frowned slightly. Did you come here just to get entangled in these boring things, Master Mu? Musian shook his head and smiled. Master, I want to ask you, Miss Bai invited you to her house today and told you to break off the engagement to humiliate you, do you think so? Yu stared at Musian's gentle smile and never spoke. He didn't quite understand what Musian wanted to say. Then if she went to the family and gave you a letter of breaking off the engagement, would you also feel that she was humiliating you? Musian continued to ask. Yu was silent for a moment, then nodded and said, of course. If that's the case, then what can I do to avoid humiliating you? Musian asked back. So as long as the engagement is broken off, it is wrong, so why not break off the engagement? Yu opened his mouth, as if he wanted to say something, but was somewhat confused by Musian, so he had to remain silent. After a moment, he said again, does Master Mu think that breaking off the engagement is right? Breaking off the engagement is naturally wrong, this is very obvious. Musian walked slowly to Bairuoxi's side, looked at the girl's somewhat complicated expression, and continued. However, Miss Bai never agreed to this marriage from the beginning to the end. She was just betrothed by her elders since she was born. Now she wants to pursue her own happiness, isn't it? Yu heard this and fell silent. He felt that Musian was making a crooked argument, but he had no reason to refute it. The marriage was arranged by the elders of the clan, and the wishes of both the man and the woman were not consulted from beginning to end. Now that the woman has grown up, she has made it clear that she doesn't like this marriage and wants to cancel the marriage. Is this wrong? If Yu's perspective is substituted at this time, many people may think that this is excessive. But from the perspective of the woman, she just rejected a marriage that she has never liked. What's wrong with that? Musian continued to ask, did Miss Bai make it clear that she doesn't like you? Yu's eyes moved slightly and looked at Bairuoxi. The noble girl in the white dress raised her eyes and said coldly, I have never liked Mr. Ye from the beginning to the end. This simple sentence almost broke Yu's defense. He could no longer keep calm on his face and staggered back 2 steps. In the past, Yu had been cold-faced for this fiancé more than once. From the beginning, he treated Bairuoxi as his fiancé, but from the beginning to the end, Bairuoxi never treated him as her fiancé. Her attitude was cold from beginning to end. At first, Yu thought that Bairuoxi treated any opposite sex of the same age like this, but now it doesn't seem to be the case. At least there is a huge difference between her attitude towards Musian and her attitude towards him. Just like now, when Musian walked into the yard, Bairuoxi looked at Musian much more frequently. If we cancel the engagement now, it will be a loss for the family, Yayu said coldly. If I marry you now, I will sacrifice Miss Bai's future happiness. I can give Ruoxi happiness, Yayu almost blurted out. No matter how much you give to someone you don't like, you won't be happy. Musian kept a calm smile. Master, yeah, you keep saying that Miss Bai's breaking off the engagement is a slap in your face and the face of the family. But it's just a breakup. As long as you explain the reason and show that the two parties are not suitable, no one will have too many gossips. To put it bluntly, the Bai family is now in decline and its strength is not much different from that of the family. No one will think that the Bai family forced the family to agree to break off the engagement, so how can the family lose face because of the breakup? You just lusted after her body and got angry when you received the breakup letter. Yayu suddenly raised his head and stared at Musian, saying, Master Mu, she can do this to me now, and she may do the same to you in the future. Then I don't have to worry about it. Master Ya. Musian smiled. Is there anything else? I still have something to do with Ruoxi. If nothing happens, Master Ya, please come back. After saying that, Musian turned his head to look at the woman behind him and said with a smile, Miss Bai, can we chat later? Bai Ruoxi lowered her eyes slightly and just said softly. There seemed to be no cold attitude towards Yayu. Then let's go in, Musian said and walked towards the hall. Yayu looked at this scene, clenched his fists quietly, raised his head and stared at Musian's back, and said, Young Master Mu, do you dare to compete with me? Bai Ruoxi frowned slightly, feeling bored, and was about to turn around and speak. At this time, Musian suddenly reached out and gently grabbed her cold, soft hand, signaling her to be silent. Then, he looked sideways at Yayu and said with a smile, I don't dare. Yayu opened his mouth slightly, feeling that there was anger filling his heart, but it was difficult to release it. He is so anxious, Musian thought for a moment and said with a smile, Okay, let's have a private competition in the Dragon Head Forest in 2 days. Are you satisfied with this, Master Yet? Bai Ruoxi was startled, then subconsciously turned to look at Musian and said, You don't have to promise him, it's okay, I will handle this matter myself. Musian raised his hand slightly to signal Bai Ruoxi to stop talking. Yayu, who was standing opposite, had already rekindled the flames of war in his eyes, and nodded, Okay. Let's meet at the Dragon Head Forest in 2 days. After that, he tore up the divorce document, turned to look at Bai Ruoxi, with a bit of anger in his eyes, and said, Miss Bai, you will definitely regret what you did today. After he defeats Musian and lets Bai Ruoxi see his talent, this woman will know who is the real chosen one. Even though he said this, when he saw Musian gently holding Bai Ruoxi's slender hand, Yayu's mentality still changed, and he felt jealousy burning uncontrollably. He stopped talking and turned to leave. Musian looked at Yayu's leaving figure and couldn't help showing an interesting smile. Obviously, the other party was anxious. Now that I think about it, it's really interesting. With this mentality, is he worthy of being called the protagonist? Musian couldn't help but chuckle to himself as he looked at the personal interface that only he could see, and the 2 big black and red characters supporting role written on it. Is there something wrong somewhere? This Yayu, at best, is just a nouveau riche who got a gold finger with good luck. What he did seemed to be somewhat different from the impression of protagonists who were good at forbearance. But there is no need to think about these things. After all, after solving Yayu, the supporting role of this interface should become the protagonist, right? Master Mu, do you have something to say to me? At this moment, a reserved and clear voice came from beside him, which also pulled Musian out of his thoughts. He nodded slightly, glanced at the hall in the courtyard, and said, Is Mrs. Bai not at home? Bairuoxi nodded slightly and asked doubtfully, Master Mu is here to see my mother. Muzian shook his head and said with a smile, just to confirm something. Bairuoxi had confusion in her eyes and didn't understand. Muzian continued, I would like to ask Miss Bai to accompany me back to Mu's house. Bairuoxi hesitated and said, what to do? Show you something interesting. Muzian turned his head to look at Bairuoxi, who looked confused, and said softly. But you have to be mentally prepared. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 22. Miss, and, Master Mu, are you going out? When Muzian took Bairuoxi out of the mansion, the two servants who were still standing guard outside the mansion saw this and couldn't help asking. In fact, under normal circumstances, servants like them would never ask about their master's affairs. However, you just left in a rage, and it is obvious that it should be related to Bairuoxi or even Muzian. And now Muzian is going to take the eldest lady away again, which inevitably makes people a little worried. Bairuoxi said softly, with a cold voice, and said, some things need to go to the Mu family. Muzian smiled and said, please wait for Mrs. Bai to come back and tell her that Miss Bai has something to do in the evening and has to go to the Mu family. She will not return to the Bai mansion tonight for the time being. The two looked at each other, and then, there was a little more ambiguity in their eyes when they looked at Muzian. Miss Bai just rejected you flatly, is it because of Muzian? Bairuoxi subconsciously turned her head to look at Muzian, her eyes slightly opened, her eyes full of surprise. Not going home at night, Muzian didn't tell her this just now. If it were in the past, Bairuoxi would probably have started to imagine it now. After all, it's no wonder that a girl would have wild thoughts when she stayed at the opposite sex's house late at night. But Muzian's performance in the past few days made her feel a little relieved. Muzian might have some ideas about her, but he would never take advantage of someone's misfortune. Bairuoxi already had such an impression in her heart. After all, the other party had had several opportunities to attack her before, but he didn't do anything. When Bairuoxi thought of this, Muzian had already opened the curtain of the carriage and turned his head and said, come up, Miss Bai. Bairuoxi came back to her senses, nodded reservedly, and walked to the side of the carriage. A gust of morning breeze blew by, and her white skirt fluttered. She wore plain short boots, had a tall figure, and the fabric was tightly attached to her curvy figure. She put one hand on her towering chest and bent down slightly to get into the carriage. Muzian signaled the driver, and the carriage began to move slowly. Bairuoxi turned his head to look at the young man beside him, waiting for Muzian to explain, but he didn't expect that after he got on the carriage, he held his head with both hands and closed his eyes to rest. Bairuoxi was silent for a while, and finally couldn't help but said, Master Mu, can you tell me now what you want to find me at the Mu family? Muzian shook his head and said, it's meaningless to tell you now, you won't believe it. Also, I'm not sure whether the information is true or false, so I won't be a rumor monger. The black-robed man said that he saw Bai Yuanfeng at the Gongsun family, but in the end, this was just one-sided. The black-robed man told him this information in order to make Muzian suspicious of the Bai family and the Gongsun family, just to prevent the Mu family from joining forces with the Gongsun family to deal with him. The authenticity of this information is still unknown. But of course, the truth will be revealed soon. Moreover, all the doubts now point to Bai Yuanfeng. Mu family. Bairuoxi sat on the chair, drinking morning tea, and seemed a little absent-minded. A few strands of hair fell on her classical and delicate face. She was wearing a white long skirt. At first glance, she looked like a cold beauty. Such a beauty was enough to make the opposite sex of her age feel inferior. At this moment, Bairuoxi held the teacup in one hand, lowered her eyes, and looked at the ground, as if she was in a daze. It should be said that she is really a great beauty. Even in a daze, She is still elegant and refined, Musian sighed with some emotion in his heart. Sensing the fiery gaze of the eldest young master of the Mu family, Bairuoxi subconsciously raised her head and looked at him. When her eyes met his, she was not shy and just asked softly, "Young Master Mu, can't you explain the reason now?" Musian shook his head, "Wait until nightfall, and you will know." Bairuoxi was startled and said to himself, "At nightfall." This is a word that is easy to be misunderstood. When thinking of Musian's fiery gaze just now, no matter how much you trust Musian, you can't help but have some fantasies. "I'll show you a surprise in a while," Musian said, and shook his head again, "No. Maybe it should be said to be a shock." "Miss Bai, you have to be mentally prepared," Musian continued. Bairuoxi's beautiful eyes flickered slightly, with a puzzled look in her eyes. But Musian had no intention of explaining. He just took a sip of hot tea from the teacup, looking ahead, looking like he was thinking about something. Seeing this, Bairuoxi stopped interrupting Musian's thoughts, holding the teacup in both hands and drinking tea quietly. After all, no matter how much she asked, Musian probably wouldn't answer. In that case, there was no need to make herself bored. After dinner at the Mu family, it was close to the hour of high, and the whole Tianqian city was already quiet at night. Musian turned her head to look at Bairuoxi, who had been sitting beside her all day and was a little tired, and said, "Miss Bai, let's go." Bairuoxi forced herself to be energetic, raised her eyes, and asked, "Where to?" "Of course to the destination. Are you going to my room?" Musian said with a teasing smile. Bairuoxi's face was stained with two light blushes, and she raised her eyes slightly. Her eyes were charming, and she whispered, "Where is the destination?" "Bai Mansion," Musian said, "I'll take you home." Bairuoxi was obviously stunned. Musian invited her to the Mu family just to sit there all day, and then send her back to the Bai family at night. Facing Bairuoxi's confused eyes, Musian gently put down the teacup and smiled. "I wonder if Miss Bai has ever tried to sneak into her own home at night." Bairuoxi frowned slightly and whispered, "Why should I sneak home?" Bai Yuanfeng supported her daughter to marry into the Mu family. If she knew that Bairuoxi was at the Mu family tonight, she would not say anything. In theory, she had no reason to sneak home. Musian glanced at the beautiful woman with a cold temperament and said faintly, "You will know soon." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 23. That night, the carriage that Musian was riding in drove through the streets in the middle of the night and stopped before reaching the Bai family. Musian jumped off the carriage, came to Bairuoxi's side, lifted the curtain, and stretched out his hand to her. Bairuoxi glanced at him in the dim light, stretched out her hand to hold that hand, and got off the carriage. She glanced at the surrounding environment, and finally couldn't help asking, "Master Mu, why do we have to go to the Bai family secretly? This is obviously her family's mansion," but Musian asked her to sneak into the Bai mansion like a thief in the middle of the night, which is really incredible. "Miss Bai, I wonder where Uncle Bai is now after being attacked and seriously injured," Musian asked. Bairuoxi was startled, and was first surprised why Musian knew about this. But then she thought, it has been so long since she saw the head of the Bai family. With the power of the Mu family in Tianqian City, it is not difficult to secretly investigate some things. She whispered, "My father is now in a very safe place to recover, and there are 2 guards who take turns to guard him." "In other words, it is your mother who is taking care of the Bai mansion now, right?" Musian asked. Bairuoxi hesitated for a moment and nodded slightly. "In other words, after Miss Bai left, there are only a few servants and Mrs. Bai alone in the Bai mansion, right?" Musian confirmed again. Mr. Mew, what do you want to say? Byruoxi frowned slightly, feeling a little uncomfortable in her heart. Miss Bai will know in a while. Musian paused, but it may not be until tomorrow night. As he spoke, he turned his head to look at the maid hiding in the dark and said, Sister Mengro, I leave it to you. Byruoxi subconsciously looked back and found that since when, there was a woman following them, wearing a goose yellow long skirt and a pair of short boots. She was obviously dressed beautifully, but she seemed to be hidden in the night. If Musian hadn't spoken, Byruoxi probably wouldn't have noticed the existence of this maid until now. Don't be surprised. Apart from anything else, she is definitely the top one in the refining spirit realm in terms of concealing her aura, Musian explained. Among the refining spirit realm cultivators that Musian knew, Wei Mengru's strength might not be the strongest, but she is the one with the most convenient ability. The black-robed man's intelligence was wrong that day because Wei Mengru's ability to conceal her aura reached the pinnacle. He didn't realize that in addition to the old man, there was another Wei Mengru who concealed her own aura all the time in the Bai mansion. Because of this, Musian never treated Wei Mengru as a maid from beginning to end. After all, if you have never treated others sincerely, how can you expect others to treat you sincerely? Don't exceed half an hour. Once the time is over, I can't guarantee that you two will not be noticed by others, Wei Mengru warned seriously. Musian nodded, looked at the girl beside him, and said, Let's go. Byruoxi was a little confused, but seeing that Musian had jumped onto the wall of the mansion, she no longer hesitated. She stepped on the ground, jumped up lightly, and stepped on the wall. Then, she turned her head to look at Musian and whispered, Master Mew, what do you want to do? Musian looked around the mansion. It was night time, the moonlight fell on the yard, the wind moved the leaves, and the leaves rustled in the dimness. It seems that the Bai family really has no servants now, Musian understood slightly in his heart, turned his head to look at Byruoxi, and said, Wait for me here for a while, I'll be back soon. Before Byruoxi spoke, Musian had already jumped off the wall. If the refining period is just to strengthen one's own physique, then in the training period, one can use Qi, the spiritual energy in the body. With this Qi, everyone can fly over the eaves and walk on the walls. Unfortunately, if I had reached the refining spirit realm, I should be patrolling in the air on a flying sword now. Musian strolled leisurely in the backyard of the Bai mansion, feeling a little regretful. Although he thought about it, he did not dare to relax his vigilance. He walked quietly in the courtyard of the Bai mansion, looking for the room where Bai Yuanfeng lived. His sight quickly fell on the second room in the backyard. The candlelight could be clearly seen flickering behind the door, and a female curve was faintly visible behind the door. Although Wei Mengru helped to cover up his breath, Musian still covered up his own breath just in case. He walked slowly forward, came to the door, and listened attentively. He didn't hear any sound. It's a pity. I really don't know why those paper doors that could be broken by poking with fingers in ancient times are not here, otherwise I could just poke a hole in the door with my fingers to see what's going on inside. Musian felt a little regretful. But he didn't give up. He searched around and soon saw an open window next to the house. He adjusted his breathing slightly, stepped forward quietly, and looked at the scene in the window. Then, his eyes suddenly showed some disappointment. Bai Yuanfeng was the only one in the room, sitting on the brocade couch, wearing a silk nightgown. After removing her light makeup, she looked much older, but her appearance was still top-notch among her peers. But after removing her makeup, there was still a big gap compared to her daughter. Is the black-robed man lying to me, or is Bai Yuanfeng too cautious? Musian thought to himself. Logically speaking, the black-robed man should not tell such a lie that would be exposed at the first poke. In other words, Bai Yuanfeng is indeed too cautious. When Musian just thought of this, someone behind him suddenly patted his shoulder gently. Musian's heart skipped a beat, and he turned his head subconsciously. Bairuoxi stood behind him without knowing when. Her beautiful eyes were angry, but she tried her best to lower her voice and said, "Master Mu, why did you sneak into my mother's room late at night?" Before he finished speaking, Muzian suddenly felt a chill on his back. He covered Bairuoxi's mouth with one hand, held her in his arms, hid her by the window, and pressed against the wall. Bairuoxi's eyes widened slightly, and she turned her head in surprise to look at the boy behind her. After finally pushing away Muzian's palm, she was about to ask, when she suddenly seemed to have sensed something, and subconsciously turned her head to look at the air. In the originally quiet backyard, a stream of light suddenly fell quietly. When the light of the stream disappeared, a man who looked extremely majestic jumped down on a flying sword. Gongsun Xiong. Bairuoxi's eyes slowly widened, unable to hide the shock in his eyes. How could Gongsun Xiong appear in Bai's house? And what made Bairuoxi even more unbelievable was that not long after, the door quietly opened, Bai Yuanfeng pushed the door open, and invited Gongsun Xiong into the room with a smile on her face. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 24. After a brief stagnation, Bairuoxi seemed a little unbelievable. She wanted to get up and look through the window to see what happened in the room. Muzian immediately grabbed her hand, put his fingers in front of his mouth, and said hush. Bai Yuanfeng's realm was average, and he would not be discovered if he peeped at her, but Gongsun Xiong was different. Even if he relaxed his vigilance after seeing Bai Yuanfeng, and Wei Mengru helped to cover his own breath, he could not guarantee that he would not be noticed. But even so, Muzian could still vaguely hear the intimate play coming from the room. Just hearing this intimate sound, there was no need to continue to confirm it. Muzian looked at Bairuoxi's pale face and knew that for her, the mental blow was extremely huge. He called twice softly, but Bairuoxi did not respond. Seeing this, Muzian immediately grabbed Bairuoxi's hand, picked her up horizontally, turned around and quietly left the Bai mansion. It was not until she got on the carriage and heard the sound of horse hooves stomping on the ground that Bairuoxi seemed to come back to her senses a little. She turned her head to look at the late-night street scene that was slowly moving backwards, with a complicated look in her eyes. Everything was obvious. No wonder Bai Yuanfeng had been unwilling to hand over the Tongmei pills, and no wonder Bai's father was attacked and seriously injured on the way back. All this was not accidental, but had been planned long ago, the result of Bai Yuanfeng and the Gongsun family's cooperation. "Master Mu, why do you think my mother said this?" Bairuoxi suddenly asked softly. She turned her head to look at the young man beside her. What good is it for her to destroy the Bai family? Muzian sighed softly, no benefit. But human emotions and behaviors are difficult to guess. If we can understand the thoughts of some people by relying on ordinary people's thinking, there will not be so many shocking crimes. You can never understand how a person's brain circuit is formed. What is really scary is never a beast, but the human heart. Women's heart. After Bairuoxi was silent for a long time, as if she had made up her mind, she looked up at Muzian's profile and said, "Master Mu, if you can save the Bai family, I will give you the Tongmei pills tomorrow." Muzian glanced at the girl and sighed, "Miss Bai, do you think the Tongmei pills are still in the Bai family now?" Bairuoxi was stunned. After being silent for a long time, she listened to the sound of the carriage moving forward, and soon a helpless smile appeared on her face. She pursed her slightly pale lips slightly, forced a smile, and said softly, "That's true, anyway, thank you Master Mu today." As she said that, she asked the coachman to stop, and then lifted the curtain to leave. "Where are you going?" Muzian asked. Bairuoxi paused slightly when she was about to leave the carriage, and said softly, "I have to deal with the Bai family's affairs. Now that her father is seriously injured in bed and her mother is the culprit who betrayed the family, she is the only one who can bear this burden." "Don't you need my help?" Muzian asked. Bairuoxi shook her head gently. Master Mu is not from the Bai family, so there is no reason for him to help. Besides, Master Mu has already helped us a lot. Ruoxi will come to thank you another day. Still a little bit of backbone, looking at the slender back of the girl who was about to jump off the carriage, Musian reached out and grabbed her soft and boneless little hand, and gently pulled her back into the carriage. Bairuoxi turned his head and looked at Musian in confusion. The beautiful face in the past seemed to have lost some blood color, less gorgeous, and more weak, and the slightly moist beautiful eyes stared straight at Musian, making people want to hold her in their arms and love her. Musian signaled the coachman in the front room to continue driving the horse. As the carriage slowly moved again, he retracted his gaze and returned his gaze to Bairuoxi. Master Mu, is there anything else to say? Bairuoxi just asked this question, and then lowered her head. The hem of her white skirt swayed gently as the carriage moved forward, revealing a small section of her snow-white calves. Musian's goal was Tongmei pills, but now Tongmei pills may have been transferred to the Gongsun family. The Bai family now has nothing that Musian wants. Miss Bai, what do you think our relationship is now? Musian asked. Bairuoxi was slightly startled. She had never thought about this question. The relationship between the two had long since changed from the original dog and goddess to an equal relationship, and since the past 2 days, there seemed to be an inexplicable ambiguity between them. It's definitely not a Taoist partner, but it's not just friends, right? Musian gently held Bairuoxi's slightly cool and soft palm. After Bairuoxi was silent for a while, her face was stained with a light blush, and she said softly, but did not break free, allowing the boy to play with her delicate hands. Uncle is only seriously injured, but that doesn't mean he is really disabled. Musian looked at the girl who seemed a little weak and helpless, and said seriously, in fact, I think with our current relationship, we can almost go to meet the parents. Parents? Bairuoxi hesitated for a moment, and then, as if he understood something, he slowly raised his head and looked at Musian. You want to meet my father? Musian nodded slightly. Compared to the Gongsun family who had been plotting for a long time, he now felt that the Bai family was more reliable. Warm Ti. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 25. After asking about the location of Bai's father, Musian first went back to the Mu family and invited Mr. Ren, who was making tea in the hall of the Mu family. When the old man heard that Musian was in trouble, he went with him to the place where Bai's father was hiding without saying a word. To Musian's surprise, Bairuoxi told him that Bai's father was not in the Bai family's mansion, but in a hidden mansion several miles west of the city gate. At this moment, Musian was sitting in the carriage on the way to the destination, frowning. When he set out, there was something he couldn't figure out, and now he felt even more suspicious. Bairuoxi seemed to feel the changes in the young man beside him, and couldn't help but ask softly, what is Master Mu thinking about? Musian said, Miss Bai, when was the last time you saw your father? I went to visit him yesterday, and he looked much better. He should be able to recover in a month or two, Bairuoxi replied. She looked gloomy, obviously still under the blow of her mother's intention to harm the Bai family, so that her originally bright and moving eyes looked a little dim. That's a bit strange. Musian frowned slightly. Under Bairuoxi's puzzled gaze, Musian continued, if your mother betrayed the Bai family, why didn't you get rid of Uncle Bai as well, but let him recover from his injuries? Bairuoxi whispered, with Dad's strength, even if he was seriously injured, it is not something that a person in the Qi training realm can deal with. What if the Gongsun family is included? Musian asked back. Since the Gongsun family can know your father's way back to the city and set traps to attack him in advance, why can't they cut the grass and wipe it out? Bairuoxi was obviously stunned. Yes, since she knew Dad's location, why didn't Mom ask people to cut the grass and wipe it out? Because of the old relationship? Or is there another purpose? While Bai Ruoxi was still thinking, Musian shook his head gently and said, "Forget it, it's useless to think about these things now. Let's ask about the specific situation in detail after seeing my uncle." Unconsciously, the few people came to a very remote cabin. Bai Ruoxi got off the carriage, turned his head and said to the three people, "Please wait a moment, there is a barrier outside, I need to tell the guards in advance." After that, Bai Ruoxi stepped on a few small steps gracefully and walked into the cabin. After a while, she pushed open the door of the cabin and nodded gently to the three people. Walking into the house, I saw a pale man lying on the bed. The man looked a little rough and his beard was messy. If outsiders knew that he was Bai Ruoxi's biological father, they would probably have such a thought: how did he give birth to such a beautiful daughter? Musian said with a respectful tone, "Uncle." Father Bai supported the head of the bed with his hands, and the guards beside him hurriedly came forward to help him sit in front of the bed. "Sit anywhere, you're welcome." Father Bai looked disordered, but his voice was still loud. Musian nodded slightly, sat on a wooden chair beside him, and decided to get straight to the point, saying, "Uncle Ruoxi and I came here this time because we have something to say." When Bai Ruoxi heard this, her little hand subconsciously grasped the fabric of her white dress, and her eyes were extremely complicated. The atmosphere seemed a little serious. Musian subconsciously glanced at the two guards. "You all go down first." Father Bai understood what Musian meant, raised his hand, and asked the two to leave. In order to avoid the family scandal, Musian also asked the old man and Wei Mengru to leave the wooden house for the time being. After the few people left, Musian hesitated for a moment and said, "This matter is related to my wife." Father Bai was obviously startled and said, "My wife?" Musian nodded, and then roughly recounted what he had seen. Bai Ruoxi, who was standing by, nodded with mixed feelings to prove the truth of the matter. Father Bai was silent for a long time, and tore off the gauze on his chest. His muscles were clearly defined. Although his face was pale, it was hard to hide his strong figure. It made people feel that this was not a cultivator in the realm of refining spirits, but a crude warrior. He looked at Musian meaningfully and said with a smile, "Boy, to be honest, my wife does not like me, but she will never betray the Bai family. She has always been in charge of the Bai family. She has all the power and money. What good will it do for her to betray the Bai family?" Bai Ruoxi felt a little hope in his heart. He slowly raised his eyes and looked at his biological father, saying, "If that's the case, why would mother be with Gongsun Xiang?" After hearing this, Bai's father was silent for a long time and sighed, "She doesn't like me or Gongsun Xiang. From the beginning when she married into the Bai family, she was reluctant, but I thought that the grace of husband and wife over the years should make her think of the old feelings, but I didn't expect." When Bai's father said this, he sighed heavily. "Then my mother, who does she like?" Bai Ruoxi couldn't help asking. Bai's father didn't say anything, but just raised his head slightly and looked at the ceiling, with a look of nostalgia in his eyes. "It's a pity that there is no cigarette at this time, otherwise Musian wanted to pass a cigarette to Bai's father and listen to him talk about the past. In fact, from the moment I married her, I knew she wouldn't want to just be the wife of the Bai family." Father Bai said. "So what does she want?" Musian couldn't help asking. Father Bai looked at Musian meaningfully and said, "Power and money." After the voice fell, Musian was puzzled at first, and then, when he connected a series of events in his mind, his expression froze slightly. He stared at Bai's father and whispered, "She wants to swallow the three major families." Bai's father just said that Bai Yuanfeng was unwilling to marry into the Bai family at the beginning, so he tried every means to solve the problem of Bai's father later. After that, he planned to let his daughter marry into the Mu family, because the Mu family was heavily guarded. Bai Yuanfeng had no chance to infiltrate at first, but as long as Bairuoxi married into the Mu family, it was equivalent to planting an eyeliner. After that, just drive the wolf to swallow the tiger. No. In terms of the power of the Mu family, it should be to drive the tiger to swallow the wolf. If Musian had not awakened his memory by chance, he would probably have readily agreed to Bairuoxi's request now. After the two got married, the Mu family would naturally stand up for the Bai family. And Musian is Bai Yuanfeng's son-in-law. After this, as long as he has a good relationship with his son-in-law and makes him trust him, the Mu family will also slowly fall under his control. This Bai's father knows everything. He is on the 5th floor, Musian said, so, uncle's serious injury is also in the plan. Bai's father grinned and said, if I knew, I would not have gone that way when I returned to the city. Who knew that she would target me instead of Gongsun Xiong? Musian. The Bai family was suppressed by the two families and could not take care of themselves. It seems that it is not simply because they were besieged by the two families, but without Bai Yuanfeng's help, this rough old man does not know how to play a battle of wits with others. Musian is a little bit overwhelmed. Uncle, I asked Mr. Ren to come over. If you don't mind, let him take a look at your injuries now. Musian reluctantly gathered his thoughts and decided to change the subject. He was afraid that he would have a cerebral congestion if he continued to talk to the other party. Father Bai looked at the handsome young man in front of him and said, why are you willing to help me? Musian pondered for a moment and said, for love. Bairuoxi blushed and secretly glanced at Musian without saying anything. But Father Bai understood something, frowned slightly, and said, I had an agreement with that vulgar old man of the Ye family. If a son was born, we would become brothers, and if a daughter was born, we would become relatives. Do you want me to break the agreement? It is precisely because of the parents' orders and the matchmaker's words that Mrs. Bai betrayed today. Musian killed people and hurt their hearts. It is obvious that Bai Yuanfeng was forced to marry into the Bai family, so today's drama happened. But it is really ironic to think about it. The person who was forced to marry is now forcing his daughter. Musian shook his head secretly. At this time, Bairuoxi suddenly said, Dad, I have broken off the engagement. Father Bai's eyes widened slightly. For a moment, the vulgar old man seemed to burst out with extremely terrifying spiritual energy. He looked up at his daughter's clear face and said angrily, you. Bairuoxi was not afraid at all. She looked at her father and said, I don't like you. Facing his daughter's fearless eyes, Father Bai's aura slowly subsided and sighed. Although the boy from the Ye family is a waste now, I can see that he has the tenacity in him. His future achievements will not be too low. As he said, he looked at his daughter deeply again. Ruoxi might regret her decision today in the future. My daughter doesn't like that you. It has nothing to do with his achievements. I just hate him, Bairuoxi said softly. Some people just don't like him at first sight, so no matter how much he does, no matter how well he does, the woman will only feel disgusted and disgusted. The more Yu wants to be a licking dog, the more Bairuoxi hates him. Most women don't like extremely humble suitors. Looking at Bairuoxi's determined look, Bai's father sighed, I won't ask about this matter. When I arranged a marriage with the Ye family without authorization, I really ignored your feelings when you grew up. Then he looked at Musian and said, sorry to bother my nephew Mu. If my injury can heal as soon as possible, I will owe the Mu family a favor. He knew that Mr. Ren of the Mu family was a famous doctor. With him, his injury might be cured in advance. Not long after, an old man with grey beard and slightly old appearance came out of the door. Bai's father nodded slightly and said, Mr. Ren, I haven't seen you for a long time. The old man just said lightly and stretched out his hand to feel his pulse. Musian stood aside and waited quietly. After a while, the old man slowly opened his turbid eyes. Under the gaze of several people, he slowly shook his head. After I go back, I will refine a medicinal elixir that can help him recover from his injuries within a month. But it is unlikely that he can recover in a short period of time. Musian was inevitably disappointed when he heard this. 1 month, after a month, the Bai family will probably be gone. In addition, the competition with Yayu will be held in 2 days. The Gongsun family is wavering, and there are black-robed people watching covetously. He originally wanted to ask Bai's father and the 2 spiritual cultivators of the Mu family to protect him secretly in case of unexpected events. But looking at this situation, he can only think of another way. At this time, the old man suddenly sighed again and said, "In fact, if there is a medicinal ingredient, let alone a month, I am afraid that Brother Bai can recover in 1 day." Bai Ruoxi's eyes brightened. She raised her head to look at the old man and said, "Mr. Ren, what are the medicinal materials you are talking about? I can send someone to find them." The old man shook his head. "The medicinal material is called Beast King Vine. It only grows in places where the immortal energy is lingering. This medicinal material is only found in the Liangyi section." Liangyi section. The hopes that a few people had just raised were suddenly poured down like a splash of cold water, and they all fell silent. Saying this is the same as not saying it. Musian shook his head secretly. Tianqian city is hundreds of miles away from Liangyi sect, not to mention that Liangyi sect does not allow outsiders to enter, let alone enter to collect medicine. After bidding farewell to Bai's father and returning to Mu's house, Musian ordered his maid to take Bai Ruoxi to the guest room to rest. Today was a huge blow to Bai Ruoxi, and she needed to take a good rest. Musian was also a little tired and was about to go back to his room. When he passed the study, he paused slightly and turned to look. It seems that there seems to be a faint white light flickering in the study. Musian pushed open the study door. In the dark study, 3 paper cranes emitting a faint white light were parked quietly by the window. The paper cranes were filled with fairy spirit. "I have been so busy these 2 days that I almost forgot to reply to the letter." Only then did Musian remember this incident, walked into the study, lit the candle, and opened the first 2 paper cranes. The first letter was just as usual, just complaining, wondering whether he should run away from home, hoping that Musian could give him some advice. The second letter asked him if he was busy recently and why he didn't reply. Obviously, after finding out that Musian didn't reply, the other party became anxious. For someone to value online dating so much and even guard the paper crane every day is enough to imagine how boring the life of this paper crane owner is. Musian opened the third paper crane. The letter was different from the previous one-sided complaints. It was mostly words of concern. Musian smiled, feeling interesting in his heart. He sat on a chair, picked up a brush, dipped some ink in it, and wrote down his longing for the owner of the paper crane on the letter paper. But of course, he didn't write the content of the letter too disgustingly. After doing all this, Musian folded the letter and gently threw it out of the window. After the relationship becomes familiar, it's time to say something ambiguous. Otherwise, it would be tragic if the other party regards you as a brother. Speaking of which, where did this paper crane fly to? Looking at the paper crane flying into the air, Musian's eyes moved slightly, and he came up with this idea. He jumped out from the window and followed closely behind the paper crane. But the flying speed of the paper crane was getting faster and faster. At first, Musian tried his best to catch up with the paper crane, but gradually he lost his strength and could only watch the paper crane slowly fly out of the sky. Xiancheng gradually flew towards the sky. The Qi training state was not yet able to fly with a sword, so Musian could only watch the paper crane gradually disappear from sight. At this time, someone suddenly tapped him on the shoulder. Musian turned around and saw the plump and voluptuous Wei Mengru standing on the flying sword, saying softly, "Come up." This cool beauty is wearing a goose yellow dress with a thin ribbon tied around her waist, which outlines her voluptuous waist. She has a sexy figure with a curved front and back. Even wearing short boots, she is almost as tall as Musian. Wei Mengru had just been aware of Musian leaving the Mu mansion, and had been secretly following behind him, and only now did she come to help. Sure enough, Sister Mengru was the most reliable in the end. Musian did not hesitate, stepped on the flying sword, and hugged Wei Mengru's slender waist that could only be grasped with both hands, feeling the softness of her delicate body. It's very soft and fragrant. Even if I don't catch the paper crane this time, I still make a lot of money. Mu Jian sighed deeply. Wei Mengru's body visibly stiffened, and she glanced at Musian coldly. Musian explained, I'm just afraid of accidentally falling off the flying sword. Wei Mengru said coldly, if you make any move, I will really throw you down. After saying that, she raised her fingertips, and the flying sword flew up like a swimming fish, turning into a stream of light and catching up with the paper crane that had already gradually moved away from the site. Time passed silently, and the only sound that could be heard was the howling wind. Unknowingly, nearly 2 sticks of incense had passed, and Musian's attention successfully shifted from Sister Mengru's body is so soft, fragrant, and really big to the paper crane in front of her that was dancing like a butterfly. He felt more and more that something was not right. I originally thought that the paper crane should be written by a young lady from Tianqian City or a neighboring city, but now it seems that the owner of the paper crane is not from Tianqian City or even a neighboring city, but from the outside world. Just when Musian thought about this, he suddenly felt a white mist swirling in front of his eyes, and abundant spiritual energy permeated the air. Just taking a deep breath made people feel relaxed and happy. But before Musian had time to enjoy this aura, he vaguely saw several faintly visible peaks ahead. Looking up slightly, the paper crane flew towards a certain mountain peak, instigating its paper wings. After Musian was silent for a long time, he whispered to himself. This paper crane actually comes from the Lianji sect. Warm reminder, if you find that clicking the next page will force you to jump to other websites, please use the chapter error or contact us at the bottom to inform us. We will handle it as soon as possible. Thank you for your understanding. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 26. There are 9 peaks in the Lianji sect, and each peak is guarded by a leader with countless disciples. Among the 9 peaks, the 10th peak is the steepest and most dangerous. The peak of the 10th peak is filled with fairy spirit. In the back mountain, a pavilion is built against the mountain. Directly opposite is a flower field. In addition, a lush green bamboo forest stands under the sky, as if it reaches the sky. Rumor has it that this 10th peak is the place where the leader of the Lianji sect goes into seclusion and practice, and this unique elegant pavilion was built for her. The reason why it is said to be a rumor is because most of the sect disciples have never seen the legendary empress. Except for the secluded disciples of the sect master, no disciples can approach this place. But, this is actually not a rumor. In a simple and clean elegant pavilion, a veiled woman is sitting in front of a pavilion, looking a little absent-minded. She was wearing a moon-white dress, with a curvaceous figure, and a pair of cold eyes without any impurities, like a lotus flower, beautiful but hard to get close to. Even though she is covered with a layer of tulle, just seeing such graceful curves, it is not difficult to imagine what kind of charming appearance the woman will have after taking off the tulle. Master, my disciple has something to report. Lan Mulian spoke softly, and even her voice was as cold as her temperament. Not far from Lan Mulian stood a woman wearing a long black dress. The night wind blew her dress back, her skirt was close to her plump chest, and her hair was simply held back with a hosta. Even though she was dressed simply, she still couldn't conceal her magnificent temperament. Seeing that the sect master did not speak, Lan Mulian was silent for a moment, and then sighed quietly. Forget it, it's not a big deal, so I won't bother master. Before entering the realm of returning to the virtual world, as expected, he still wouldn't leave the sect. After saying that, Lan Mulian turned around and was about to leave. At this moment, the woman said, "You want to go down the mountain to relax. Is it related to the paper cranes you have received these days?" Lan Mulian was about to leave when he suddenly stopped and slowly turned his head to look at his master. "Master, do you even know this little thing?" Lan Mulian asked softly. Her voice was still calm, but for some reason, it seemed to be mixed with a trace of emotion that she had never had before. "I didn't expect that the sect master who was telling others about Sci-fi this time knew about it. Obviously for the master, this should be just a trivial matter. Every day paper cranes fly to the back mountain, even a fool would know it." The sect leader looked sideways, and it was only then that he saw her face clearly. Her black hair is spread to her waist, and her sideburns fall down on her classic and delicate face. Viewed from the side, she has a pure and flawless three-dimensional look. The sect leader sat down at the tea table beside him, with his slender legs crossed and his chin propped up as he looked at his disciple. His slender, green fingertips were tapping the table, and his other hand was supporting his chin. His eyes did not show much majesty, as if he was thinking about something. "Is it a Taoist companion?" the sect leader asked. Lan Mulian shook his head gently. "It's just that my disciple threw down a paper crane before, and then the paper crane seemed to be picked up by someone. After that, he had a few words with the other party in his spare time, but he was not a Taoist monk. But it seems that I haven't received any paper cranes in the past 2 days." Lan Mulian pursed her lips, lowered her eyes slightly, and said softly, "Maybe I am busy with other things and have no time to reply." After she finished speaking, she suddenly seemed to feel something, and turned her head to look outside the accord. She could feel that her magic weapon was returning to her. "It looks like your paper crane is back." When the sect leader spoke, his beautiful eyes casually glanced in a certain direction outside. "A natural furnace. If I become a sect disciple in the future, I am afraid that I will be beaten to death by those female elders." The sect master shook his head slowly, brewed a pot of tea, picked up a sunspot on his fingertips, and played chess leisurely. One person's game. After Lan Mulian left the accord, he raised his hand to twist a cloud in the sky. The cloud seemed to come alive and stayed at her feet. She stepped on the clouds and floated slowly towards the direction of the paper crane. When passing a certain mountain peak, all the disciples training below couldn't help but look up. "Look, it's senior sister Lan. You have reached the peak of God refining at the age of 23, and are only one step away from returning to the void and becoming a land god. Senior sister Ian's talent is really too strong. And she's also very beautiful, isn't she? If I could marry such a beauty, it would be worth it even if I shorten my life by 20 or 30 years." A disciple sighed softly. "Shhh, keep your voice down, do you want to be beaten by others later?" the fellow disciple on the side warned softly. Only then did the disciple realize that when his voice fell, there were dozens of unkind glances around him. He glanced at his senior brother gratefully, not daring to say anything else. He just raised his head and stared at the charming curvy woman gradually leaving. Then he looked away worriedly, and sighed secretly with some emotion. Such a woman is destined to have no fate with disciples like them from birth. This paper crane actually came from the Liangyi section, so the person who wrote to me before was the daughter of a certain leader. At this moment, Muzian stepped on the flying sword, looked up at the distant peak, and couldn't help but secretly guess. He had to doubt the possibility of this matter, because it was not difficult to judge from the tone of the paper crane owner's previous conversation with him that the other party should have grown up in a quite favorable environment. But he didn't expect that the other party turned out to be a disciple of the Liangyi sect. And from the words and deeds in the letter at that time, it is not difficult to see that the other party's status in the Liangyi sect should not be low. I wonder if there will be a chance to see each other during the next sect assessment. Also, Sister Mengru said that the man in black robe seemed to have a reaction to the paper crane. Could it be that the other party has some connection with the Liangyi sect? Musian shook his head gently, thought no more, and said, Sister Mengru, further ahead is the Liangyi section, let's go back. Before becoming a disciple of the sect, if you break into the Liangyi sect at will and you are discovered, you may be in a lot of trouble. Musian is not stupid enough to break into other people's sect without care. Wei Mengru nodded slightly, turned around and was about to leave. At this time, she seemed to feel something. The flying sword stopped in mid-air, and she turned her head slightly to look behind her. Musian took advantage of the situation and looked around. In the distant sky, there seemed to be a woman in a white dress slowly floating towards her on the clouds. Musian was not surprised by this. After all, this was already near the foot of the Liangyi sect, so it was not surprising that he would be noticed. But they didn't break into the Liangyi sect just now, so as long as they explain it to the other party, it should be fine. When Musian thought of this, he just raised his head and saw that the woman had arrived in front of the two of them. The tulle covers her beautiful and charming face, and her figure is slim and convex, revealing an aloof beauty that is difficult to conceal. Musian was quickly attracted to this female cultivator. Then, his eyes suddenly froze slightly, and his eyes fell on the paper crane in her hand. Paper crane? Musian discovered a blind spot. Then, he felt a little weird in his heart, and secretly took another look at the woman in the white dress in front of him. To be honest, he was a little unsure of the identity of the other party. The owner of the paper crane in the letter clearly sounded like a lively young lady, but the woman in front of him exuded an aloofness that was incomparable to others. There is no way to connect the two. At this time, Wei Mengru said, we are just passing through this place and have never stepped into the section. Lan Mulian said softly, cherishing the words like gold. She just came out to look for the paper crane and happened to notice someone outside the sect, so she stopped by to take a look. As he spoke, he glanced at Wei Mengru inadvertently. He was followed by a maid from the god-refining realm. It seemed that this young man was also the eldest son of a certain family. He also seems to have good talent. He just practiced the Qi realm. It seems that he is a person who has no talent but likes to be lazy. Lan Mulian shook his head secretly, lost interest in the two of them, and said, if you two are fine, please leave as soon as possible. After saying that, she had no intention of chatting with the two of them anymore, and was about to leave behind Yun Duo. Seeing this, Musian suddenly said, Senior sister, she has gone down the mountain anyway, how about taking this opportunity to run away from home? Lan Mulian's back was obviously stagnant as he was about to leave. She slowly turned her head and looked at Musian. Under the gauze, there was a trace of surprise in those cold and beautiful eyes. Musian also had a clear view of the woman's reaction, and he had the answer in his heart. It seems that she is really the owner of the paper crane. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 27. Lan Mulian's step slowly stopped, and he turned his head slightly to look at the young man behind him. There was a look of surprise in a pair of beautiful eyes that were as cold as ice. The gauze could not hide the beautiful and refined appearance. She pursed her lips slightly and said softly, "Is it you?" The conversation between the two was very concise. If ordinary people heard it, they would not understand what they were talking about. But Musian understood. It would be better to say that everything had been proven from the moment Lan Mulian reacted to the 4 words running away from home. However, he was still a little surprised. After all, even Musian had never thought that the true identity of the owner of the paper crane was actually a disciple of the Liangyi sect. And looking at it like this, it seems that the seniority is not low. Lan Mulian continued to ask, "You two should be from a big family in a nearby city, right? Why are you here?" The Liangyi sect is backed by the Sea of World, and walking around the Lianji sect for several hundred miles is the legendary Sea of World. The sea is so vast that ordinary monks cannot see the end even if they fly for 2 or 3 days without rest. Logically speaking, they cannot want to go to the Sea of the World. Muzian thought for a moment and decided to tell the truth, saying, "Actually, we went to the Lianji sect to find some medicinal materials. It is said that the Beast King vine is only found near the Lianji sect." "You want the Beast King vine?" Lan Mulian raised her eyebrows slightly and said, "What do you want this for?" "The Beast King vine is used to refine elixirs for seriously injured patients. Could it be that someone in your family is seriously ill?" Muzian sighed softly. "It's a long story, but the Beast King vine is of great significance to me." As he spoke, he looked up at the woman in front of him and said, "Senior sister, do you know where I can find the Beast King vine nearby?" "I'm not your senior sister." Lan Mulian's voice was clear and cold, and her fluttering white dress made people feel inaccessible. As cool as a fairy in a painting. She continued, "Besides, I don't know where to find the Beast King vine." Wei Mengru was listening to the conversation between the two. After hearing the words, she said softly, "Let's go back first." "Wait a minute." Muzian lowered his voice to the maid next to him, then raised his head and smiled, "Senior sister, I know a friend. She has been struggling with the family for nearly a week. Every time she writes in her letter, she says she wants to leave family, but every time they just talk about it and never take any real action. I wonder if this senior sister has any impression of her?" Lan Mulian teased a strand of hair with her green fingertips, lowered her eyes slightly, and said lightly, "I don't know him." After a moment of silence, she glanced at Muzian casually, and then sighed softly, "What do you call this young master?" "Muzian." Lan Mulian nodded slightly and said reservedly, "Mr. Mu, I can give you the Beast King vine, but can I ask, are you busy with other things these days? Is this because I didn't reply to the letter?" Muzian understood. He sighed, "Actually, one of my uncles with whom I have a close relationship has been seriously ill in bed these past 2 days. I have been trying to find ways to help him these past 2 days. I finally went home tonight in my spare time. The first thing I did was go to the study, hoping to reply as soon as possible to avoid the worry of the owner of the paper crane." Wei Mengru glanced at Muzian casually. "Muzian has been busy these past 2 days, but he hasn't even forgotten to reply to Zhaihe's letter. It's obvious that he just forgot. No wonder there was no reply in the past 2 days. It turns out that the elder of the clan is seriously ill." Lan Mulian's beautiful eyes flashed slightly, then she closed her eyes slightly, her consciousness scanned the ring on the index finger of her right hand, and took out a small box with exquisite workmanship. "Do you want to accept the ring?" "And it seems to be a high-quality acceptance." Muzian was thoughtful. "This kind of storage ring that can store items is very valuable in itself, but the Mu family is very powerful in Tianqian City, so it is not difficult to get such a storage ring. However, judging from the fact that Lan Mulian's consciousness has been searching the ring for so long, it is obvious that her ring contains a large number of treasures." Lan Mulian gently threw the small box out and fell into Muzian's hand. When he opened the box, a strong medicinal fragrance hit his face. Muzian took a closer look and saw that there was a root that looked as thick as a teacup in the box. The mottled marks on the surface of the root seemed to vaguely show the word king. "It is the Beast King vine." Muzian looked up and saw that Lan Mulian's expression was still cold, and he said, "There is no need to thank you or anything like that. Just give me one of the refined pills next time. Such a large Beast King vine can at least refine a batch of elixirs with the same curative effect. This Beast King vine is almost the same as giving it for free." Muzian is almost certain that this is definitely a rich lady. "Fairy sister, I don't want to work hard anymore." Muzian nodded and said, "Thank you, senior sister." Lan Mulian nodded slightly and said, "Which city are you in?" "Tianqian City." Lan Mulian said softly, if nothing happens, go back. If you wander outside for too long, you may be mistaken for the enemy. Musian smiled, we'll go back right now. Senior sister, do you want to go back to Tianqian City with us? Lan Mulian hesitated for a moment, shook his head and said, let's give it a few days. By the way, what's your senior sister's name? Musian suddenly asked. Lan Mulian looked over slightly, with a slight smile on his face for the first time, you'll know next time we meet. The voice was as clear as breaking ice, and under the gauze, there was a faint smile in the beautiful eyes looking at Musian. Lan Mulian held up the moon-white skirt, wearing short boots embroidered with clouds, and stepped on the clouds gracefully. She was tall and well-proportioned. Even without seeing her face, her slender back alone gave people endless reverie. Just one glance would tell that she was a stunning beauty. If a high-ranking disciple of Lianji sect went down the mountain to Tianqian City, it would probably make the whole Tianqian City a sensation. Watching Lan Mulian's figure disappear from his sight, Musian felt emotional, retracted his sight, sat on the flying sword, and smiled sideways, let's go back, Sister Mengru. Wei Mengru nodded, raised her fingertips, controlled the flying sword, and took Musian to the direction of Tianqian City. She faced the night wind, her hair flying, the fabric was close to her skin, outlining a seductive curve. What are you going to do next? Wei Mengru suddenly asked. Musian sat on the flying sword, looked up at Wei Mengru who was wearing a goose yellow dress, stroked the small box in his hand with his fingers, and smiled, with the Beast King vine, the remaining materials can be easily gathered by just sending someone to the auction house. In other words, now we have all the characters, scenes, and events. Now, all we have to do is let all the actors appear on stage, and then accompany them to perform their best, right? So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 28. Yeah, family. In the dead of night, everyone was in deep sleep, except for the candle light in a room. In the room, the handsome boy slowly opened his dark eyes. He adjusted the spiritual energy in his body, then took a deep breath and slowly exhaled. With an unconcealable joy in his eyes, he whispered to himself. Peak of refining essence. In just less than a few months, he was promoted from a waste to the peak of refining essence. The talent shown by Yayu amazed everyone in the clan, whether it was his cousins, parents, or the elders, they all looked at him with new eyes. But this time, he would no longer be as impetuous and complacent as in the past. During the time when he became a waste, Yayu's originally impetuous heart had already become extremely calm. However, once this calm heart thought of Musian, it couldn't help but become a little violent. We must defeat Musian, only then can the future sky be more vast. Yayu quietly clenched his fists, his eyes filled with fighting spirit. Although it is unlikely to reach the Chi training realm within 2 days, with my current trump card, even a cross-level battle is not a problem. Although Musian is in the Chi training realm, he has been hollowed out because of his long-term indulgence in beauty. Although he is in the Chi training realm, I am afraid that his true strength is similar to his. Wait and see, Ruoxi Yayu thought to himself. After defeating Musian in the Dragon Head Forest in 2 days, Ruoxi will regret her decision that day. Recalling the scene of being rejected in the courtyard of the Bai mansion that day, and the eyes and attitude of Bai Ruoxi when she looked at Musian at that time, and thinking about how he had worked hard to pursue the other party for so long, but was treated coldly by the other party, Yayu's heart was burning with jealousy. Even if he could pretend to be calm in front of outsiders, it was hard to swallow the anger when he saw his beloved fiancé leaning towards that evil young man. However, this matter was about to come to an end. With it, Tianqian City was just a beginning for him. Yayu looked at the heavenly qi that was quietly condensed in his hand, his eyes full of confidence. According to the grandfather in the body, the heavenly qi was the fragment left when a descent to immortality strongman fell in the past. Each heavenly chi has different abilities. And the heavenly chi in his hand can refine the external spiritual energy and incorporate it into his body at all times. If used actively, it can accelerate the refining of the surrounding spiritual energy for its own use. It can be said that you can return to the ranks of geniuses in the family, and this heavenly chi played a decisive role. It's just a pity that the old man in the body is still sleeping. He can only wake up after he enters the chi training realm. Otherwise, if the old man is there, this trump card, a mere Musion, is not a problem at all. Yu slightly restrained his mind. He sat cross-legged at the head of the bed, took out the chi of heaven, closed his eyes silently, and entered the state of cultivation again. At the same time, on the other side, it was already late at night after Muse Haina returned to the Mu mansion. He gave the Beast King Vine to Wei Mengru for temporary custody and asked her to give it to Mr. Ren tomorrow. After doing all this, Musion was preparing to go back to his room to rest. When passing the corridor of the yard, he saw Bairuoxi standing in front of the yard. She was bathed in the moonlight, and her snow-white skin seemed to be stained with a layer of silver light, against a beautiful face. The sadness in her eyes added a bit of pity. In just a few days, the Bai family not only suffered a disaster, but also her mother was suspected of betrayal, her father was seriously injured, and now she has a home but cannot return. This series of events is like a heavy burden, directly pressing on the girl's shoulders, making her physically and mentally exhausted, so that she was not sleepy at all lying on a strange bed tonight. How glorious was the Bai family in the past! Miss Bai walked on the street like a star surrounded by the moon. Although she is still popular now, there will always be some jealous women who are jealous of Bairuoxi's beauty and gossip behind her. When they were rich, they called Miss Bai's coldness noble and elegant, but now, those gossiping women secretly scolded her for being pretentious and pretending to be a man. No matter what era, there will always be such jealous people. Seeing others make money is more uncomfortable than losing money. This is jealousy. The beauty in the white dress looked up at the hazy moonlight, thinking back to what happened in these days, and couldn't help but sigh softly. At this moment, she suddenly felt a warmth on her back. She looked back and saw a light blue fur coat on her shoulders. "Master Mu," Bairuoxi almost blurted out. The young man who looked like a gentleman stood behind her without knowing when, smiling, and said, "It's cold, so you should pay attention to keeping warm when you go out." Bairuoxi looked at Musion with a complicated look and said softly, "Thank you." She hesitated for a moment and continued, "But when you reach the chi training stage, the wind and cold can be easily forced out of the body dash." Before she finished speaking, Musion put his index finger on the girl's soft lips, and smiled under her wide eyes. "Don't say this at this time, it will create a little atmosphere." Bairuoxi fell silent. If it were usual, she would probably chat with Musion for a few more words, but too many things happened tonight, and she was in such a heavy mood that she was in no mood to joke. "I found the Beast King Vine," Musion suddenly said. Bairuoxi absent-mindedly said Then, her expression suddenly froze, and she slowly raised her head to look at the young man with a gentle smile, and said, "Master Mu, what did you just say?" "Beast King Vine, that is a rare medicinal material that can only be found near the mountain gate of Lianji section." She knew that Musion had just gone out, but she didn't expect that he actually went to look for the Beast King Vine. And, he actually found it. "I have handed it over to Sister Mengro. I will go to the auction house tomorrow to prepare the medicinal materials, and then I can refine the elixir to heal Uncle Bai," Musion continued. Bairuoxi opened her mouth slightly and blinked, as if she was still digesting this information. It was not until a long time later that she broke free from her thoughts and raised her head and said, "Master Mu, is this true?" She raised her head slightly, and her pair of bright and beautiful eyes, which were originally dull and without light, showed a trace of hope when she saw hope. Her towering chest proudly supported the fabric, bright and moving under the moonlight. Musian looked at the girl's delicate face and sighed helplessly. Do you think there is any point in me deliberately lying to you? Bairuoxi stood there in silence for a long time, then smiled and said softly, that's right, sorry, I lost my temper. Thinking about it, it is completely meaningless for Musian to lie to her now, because if it is a lie, it will be exposed tomorrow. Go back and rest first, go to the auction house early tomorrow, I need to prepare some more materials. Musian gently placed his palm on the beauty's shoulder. Bairuoxi suppressed the joy in her heart, nodded gently, and then turned around and walked slowly to a room in front of the yard. When she was about to reach the door of the room, she paused slightly, turned her head and looked at Musian, and said sincerely, thank you, this time, Ruoxi will definitely repay you in the future. Please believe me, Master Mu, Bairuoxi said seriously. Musian just smiled and nodded. He believed Bairuoxi's words. The last time in the carriage, Bairuoxi's tone when she asked him was a bit perfunctory, but this time, it was obvious that she was serious. As for the reason, it was naturally related to Bairuoxi's contact with Musian in the past few days and the difficulties that happened to the girl. In fact, from this moment on, the victory or defeat of the competition with Yayu 2 days later was no longer important. No matter what he did, Yayu had already lost. The protagonist may still be Yayu, but the heroine is no longer Bairuoxi. The real focus now is not Yayu, but suppressing bandits. Suppressing the bandit of the black-robed man. After watching Bairuoxi leave, Musian also turned around and was about to go back to his room to rest. At this time, a twisted shadow quietly emerged from the darkness on the side. It was the spy of the Mu family. Musian turned his head to look at the spy and said lightly, what's the matter? Master, the elder asked you to meet him in the secret room, the spy said respectfully. Dividing line It's not easy to copy books without a post, and I don't know how I wrote it. If you think it's okay, please give me some recommendations to comfort me. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 29. As the largest force in Tianqian City, the Mu family is naturally more than just a master on the surface. In addition to Wei Mengru and Ren Lao on the surface, Musian's parents are also in the god-refining realm. It's just that they left Tianqian City some time ago due to some matters, and the entire Mu family was left in the hands of Mr. Ren. However, Musian has basically been dealing with the Mu family's affairs these days, and the main reason is that the old man wants to temper Musian. Although Musian's performance in the past was unsatisfactory, he seems to have matured a lot in recent times. Even if Musian is unable to hold on to the end, he will still have other trump cards to clean up the mess. One of the real trump cards of the Mu family is these elders who practice in seclusion. Even Musian's parents had to call out elder when they saw those elders. Under the leadership of the spy, Musian walked along a winding and deep path, and unknowingly came to a secret room. At the same time, the spy beside him had already quietly left the door of the secret room. One of the things you need to keep in mind when working as a spy is don't know too many secrets. If you want to live a long life, you must keep this sentence in mind at all times. Why does this place look so eerie? Musian said in a respectful tone. Great elder, what's the matter with coming to me so late? Even Musian has never seen this great elder since he was a child. It is said that because of his old age, he has been sleeping all year round and has never interfered in the big and small affairs of the clan. Even people in the clan thought that the great elder had already passed away. I don't know what happened to such a being that was alarmed. Even Musian was inevitably a little curious. When Musian thought of this, An old voice came from the secret room, the foundation is solid, but the energy is weak. You usually go to the Jiaofang department, right? How come this great elder is known to the Jiaofang secretary? Muzian clasped his fists and said respectfully, I have met the great elder. The old voice came from the secret room again, I heard from the spies about what happened in Tianqian City recently. You have eliminated harm for the people, which shows that you have good character. However, you need to be careful when competing with Yayu. Being able to be promoted to the peak of refining in less than a few months, that young man's future achievements are destined to be high. The peak of refining, Muzian was slightly startled, a little surprised, he has already reached the peak of refining. He remembered that Wei Mengru had said a few days ago that Yayu was only a 7th level refiner. With that thing here, a few days can reach the peak of refining, it's enough. The elder in the secret room sighed. Muzian's eyes moved slightly and asked, is there something in Yayu's body that accelerates his cultivation? I'm not sure if there is anything in the Ye family's boy, but I know what the man in black robe who secretly sneaked into the Mu family a few days ago wants. The old man in the stone gate spoke slowly, the energy of heaven. Muzian's eyes froze slightly. No wonder Yayu's cultivation speed is so fast. If it is the chi of heaven, it should indeed be such a speed. Muzian had read descriptions of the chi of heaven in ancient books before, and he probably knew what kind of treasure this was. But Muzian was still puzzled and said, Great Elder, in this case, why didn't the man in black robe directly take away the heavenly energy from Yayu's body, but instead asked for our help? Is he afraid of the masters in Tianqian City, or is it because he has made certain oaths? Muzian opened his mouth to make a guess again. You have a good understanding. There was a hint of appreciation in the great elder's tone. In the world of cultivating immortals, monks cannot make vows casually. Once they break their promises, they may suffer thunder disaster. But if you entrust others to do this, the thunder tribulation will not be triggered. The man in black robe had never done anything to Yayu. The most likely possibility was that he had made some oath. Does the great elder want me to stop the man in black robe from taking away the energy of heaven, or does he want me to replace the man in black robe? Muzian suddenly asked. I'm just giving you a reminder. As for what to do, you can make your own decision. However, Yayu is destined not to be a thing in the pool in the future. If you can, try not to make enemies with him. The chi of heaven is a rare treasure that only chooses the chosen son with great luck as its host. The so-called great luck, to put it bluntly, means that you will survive jumping off a cliff and will have adventures, you will not die even if you are chased by others, and you will definitely be rescued. Although you are plain looking, you can always attract girls in various postures and angles. Like and notice. Muzian was startled and said in a subtle mood, it's too late. The younger generation will basically not hold grudges when they grow up. It is not difficult to make friends with Yayu, the elder said earnestly. His fiancée is staying overnight at our Mu's house. Muzian spoke concisely. Great elder. Did this kid really catch the Bai family's apple? The elders in Shimen were silent for a while, then sighed softly and said, that's all, you left the Mu family tonight, but went to the Liangyi sect. Yes, Muzian said. Old man Ren told me that if you want to treat the head of the Bai family, you need the Beast King Vine. However, the Beast King Vine is a medicinal material that is only available in the Liangyi section without the help of the Bai family, you have to be careful. In addition, concentrate on cultivation. When you enter Liangyi sect in the future, you can find a few Taoist partners. You can find any medicinal materials you want there. Obviously, the elder wanted to warn Muzian to focus on cultivation and not indulge in women. However, Muzian hesitated for a moment and said, but I found the Beast King Vine. Perhaps because he felt that the voice in the secret room was quiet for a while, Muzian explained. We met a fairy sister outside the sect gate of Liangyi section. She gave me a Beast King Vine and said that I would give her one after refining a furnace of elixirs. The old man in the stone gate was silent for a long time, and then slowly said, "It's good to use external forces, but you must also remember to improve your own strength." "I know, but the elder doesn't know that I was born with a bad stomach." Musian was not humble. So he had to eat soft rice. A faint sigh came from the secret room, saying, "Back off." Obviously talented, but wanting to live off others, how could the eldest son of the Mu family give birth to such a child? The old man in the secret room shook his head slowly. He has some of his charm when he was young. Not far from the center of Tianqian City, you can see a high-rise building decorated in a classical and elegant style. It has 5 big characters Chenexai Auction House written on it. This is the largest auction house in Tianqian City, and it is also one of the industries under the name of Chenexai Chamber of Commerce. The next morning, Musian came to the hall behind the auction house at the invitation of Fei Ying, the auctioneer of Chenexai Chamber of Commerce. Fei Ying sat on the tea chair next to Musian. Her red cheongsam outlined her extremely charming waist and perky buttocks. Her left leg was placed on her right leg, and her feet were swinging red embroidered shoes. She had an excellent figure, and a beauty mole under her right eye added a bit of mature and charming temperament to her. In the past, some of the items in the auction house were sold at high prices, partly because some passionate young men wanted to make this woman smile or attract her attention. However, so far, no one has succeeded in getting the beauty back. "Master Mu, what are you going to buy this time? I have prepared an elegant pavilion for you. I will let my men take you there later." Fei Ying smiled charmingly, and her eyes were fixed on Musian. In the past, Musian was also one of those passionate young men who wanted to make a beautiful woman smile. He made a name for himself at the auction and bought some useless things. For auctioneers like Fei Ying, the most favorite is a sponsor like Musian. Therefore, they will naturally give special care to the other party. Some auctioneers even occasionally meet the special requirements of sponsors in order to stabilize the source of customers. Of course, Fei Ying's level does not need to do these things to stabilize the source of customers, and the main reason is her business ability. Musian took out the prepared note and put it on the table, smiling, "I won't go to the auction house today. Sister Fei Ying just needs to prepare 3 copies of the herbs written on it for me." Fei Ying picked up the note on the table and glanced at it. "These herbs are not particularly precious, so it's not difficult to get them together." "Okay, I'll ask someone to prepare them right away." Fei Ying nodded gently, and then, with a turn of her eyes, she looked at Musian with a smile and said, "Really not going to the auction house for another round? Sister can give you a special discount." While speaking, she gently supported the table with her palm, looked down at the boy sitting on the chair, with a smile on her face, and looked at Musian charmingly. Musian just looked up and saw a huge sense of oppression coming. Well, oppression in all senses. Cheongsam is indeed the most prominent dress for women's figure. Musian reached out and wrapped his arms around the woman's waist, which was full of mature charm. He looked up at her and said with a smile, "If this is the discount that sister is talking about, I would be very happy." She never thought that she would be teased, but Fei Ying's expression did not change. She just looked at Musian with a smile and said, "This place is not convenient. Let go quickly. If someone sees it, it will not be a good thing if it spreads out." Musian smiled and said, "Sister, do you think I am afraid of my reputation getting bad?" As he spoke, he hugged her more boldly. Finally, a blush appeared on Fei Ying's cheeks. She glared at Musian and said in a soft voice, "Little pervert, let go quickly." Musian then let go of his palm and slowly poured himself a cup of tea. Fei Ying subconsciously took 2 steps back and glanced at the boy who was sitting in front of the tea chair drinking tea leisurely with some shame and anger. Then, she couldn't help but narrow her eyes slightly. Compared with before, the temperament of this child seems to have changed a lot. It seems that the previous rumor that Musian stood up for justice is probably true. The fact that Musian stopped Gong Sun-zan from humiliating a woman spread throughout Tianqian city. At that time, some people questioned the rumor. Even if the person involved came forward to prove it, there were still people who questioned the authenticity of the rumor. There was nothing they could do about it. In the past, Musian's image as a bad boy was deeply rooted. Rather than letting them believe that the bad boy saved people, they believed that red rain would fall from the sky. Fei Ying was also one of them. Because in the past, Musian looked at her with eyes full of desire. In Fei Ying's impression, it was good enough that the young master of the Mu family did not join Gong Sun-zan in humiliating the maid, so how could he stop Gong Sun-zan? But judging from Musian's performance today, the rumor might be true. Although Musian did some intimate things to her today, his expression and tone were much more natural, and he did not have the vulgarity of the past. This kind of confident temperament is the easiest to attract women. Although she thought about it, it was not suitable to chat now, nor was it suitable to find out what happened to this young master. Fei Ying was very clear about what to do and when. She quickly restrained her emotions and said, "Wait here for a while, I'll ask someone to prepare the medicinal materials for you." Musian nodded, "Yes." Then, he looked at the back of the woman who was about to leave with her hips twisted, and suddenly said, "By the way, has President Huang come to the auction house?" "President?" Fei Ying paused slightly, turned her head and looked at the smiling boy in confusion, and asked in confusion, "Do you have something to do with our president?" "It seems that he should be here," Musian asked. Fei Ying nodded gently. "The president did come to the auction house today, saying that he was waiting for an important guest." Musian smiled and said, "Then go and ask your president to come over first, and say that the important guest has arrived." Fei Ying obviously didn't believe it, just thought he was joking, glanced at Musian, and smiled, "Don't make a fuss, I don't dare to disturb the president casually. Wait for me here for a while, I will bring the herbs you want later." Musian put down the teacup gently and said, "I am very serious, Sister Fei. Just tell President Huang that I'm here, as for whether he comes or not, it's up to him." Fei Ying looked at the boy twice more doubtfully. She could see that Musian was not joking, so, the important guest mentioned by the president is really the young master of the Mu family. Since the other party has said this, let's go and tell the president. Thinking of this, Fei Ying quickly showed a charming smile on her face, and said, "In this case, then I will go and tell the president, but I can't be sure whether he will come or not." Musian smiled and nodded, watching Fei Ying's charming figure disappear from his sight. He was not afraid that President Huang of the Dan Chamber of Commerce would not come. President Huang is a smart man, so he will definitely come. The Gong Sun family sent thugs, and the Mu family will also send thugs to deal with the black-robed man. The Dan Chamber of Commerce, even if it does not send thugs, has no reason to do nothing, right? It takes money to deal with the demon cultivators. This money must not be paid by the Mu family. It is not appropriate for the Gong Sun family to pay. It is very appropriate for the Dan Chamber of Commerce to pay this money. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 30. In the side hall, the master of the Dan Chamber of Commerce was sitting on a chair. He was dressed quite gorgeously, and his face had already left the vicissitudes of life. At this time, he was slowly brewing tea, looking at ease. "Master, where is the important guest you mentioned? I have to go to the auction later, and Manor is waiting for me." The beautiful woman next to him asked while pressing Master Wang's shoulders. "Is this the first time someone has made an appointment with you but is late?" There was a hint of dissatisfaction in the beautiful woman's tone. She could see that her master valued the important guest very much, so he came to the auction house early this morning to wait. As a result, it was almost an hour later, but the important guest still did not come. Upon hearing this, Mr. Huang stroked his beard and smiled, "I didn't make an appointment with him." "Ah. The beautiful woman looked at her husband in astonishment and said, "How do you know he will come if we haven't made an appointment?" "He will come. This is business," Mr. Huang said with a smile. "If he doesn't come, it will be troublesome." The beautiful woman couldn't help but worry, "Is this business so important?" Mr. Huang nodded and said seriously, "Important, very important business. If he doesn't come, I will make a lot of money for nothing, which will make me very uneasy." "I made money for nothing, but I'm not at ease," the beautiful woman repeated in confusion. Mr. Huang tapped the table lightly with his index finger wearing a jade ring, and smiled, "There is no job in this world where you can pick up money by bending down. Now I've made this much money for nothing, but I may have to spit out more in the future. Free things may not really be free." The beautiful woman seemed to understand. Then, he said tentatively, "Master, it's been more than an hour, and the auction is about to start. If I don't go there, Manor will be angry again." "Let her be angry. You spoil that girl so much that she is so unscrupulous. If this goes on, she will be embarrassed outside sooner or later." Master Huang frowned. His tone was full of reprimands, but when he thought of that eccentric daughter, his face eased a little and said, "Forget it, you go find Manor first. If she doesn't come later, I will find time to visit her again in the next 2 days. Master Huang has no sons, only a daughter born to him and his wife. As for this daughter, the two have loved her since she was a child, so she has spoiled some strange little problems." The beautiful woman nodded gently and turned to leave the side hall. Not long after, Fei Ying, wearing a red cheongsam, walked into the side hall and said respectfully, "Master, the auction is about to begin." Master Huang played with the two smooth and round gem balls in his hand and nodded, "I know, but this kind of thing is usually handled by you, don't ask me specifically." As he said that, he casually asked, "Is there anything else?" "The eldest young master of the Mu family said he wanted to see you, and said he was the important guest you were looking for." Fei Ying paused, glanced at Master Huang who had no expression, and continued, "Shall I reject the other party?" "No, you go to host the auction." Master Huang put down the two gem balls in his hand, stroked his beard and smiled. "For important guests, it's better for me to go there in person. At least I have to show my sincerity." Fei Ying was stunned for a moment, and looked at Master Huang twice in surprise. Then, she recalled what the eldest young master of the Mu family who had just made a move had said, and she was stunned for a moment. So, the important guest that Mr. Huang was waiting for was actually the eldest son of the Mu family. When Fei Ying thought of this, her slender fingertips gently touched the charming lips, and her eyes flickered slightly. Mr. Huang walked into the side hall and saw the young man drinking tea in the side hall. Muzian obviously noticed it, raised his head and smiled, "Uncle Huang." Mr. Huang smiled and nodded, and sat down on the chair across the table from Muzian. The maid next to him came forward to pour him a cup of tea, and then quietly stepped aside. He raised his hand and ordered the servants in the side hall to leave the hall. Then, he slowly picked up the teacup and took a sip of tea, and then sighed softly, "Nephew Mu, your uncle has been sleeping very restlessly these 2 days." Muzian said with concern, "If you don't sleep well, I can ask Mr. Ren to make 2 tranquilizing pills for you later, maybe you can sleep more peacefully." "Then thank Mr. Ren for me first." Mr. Huang laughed heartily. Then, he suddenly sighed softly and said, "However, the most important factor that can make uncle sleep more peacefully is not the tranquilizing pill, but you." "Me?" Mr. Huang nodded and said, "I was worried that nephew Mu would treat me as an outsider these days, so I couldn't sleep." Muzian smiled and said, "How could this be? I have always treated uncle as my own, so I came to find you today." He went straight to the point and continued, "Uncle should have heard about the black-robed man? As long as he is in Tianqian City, we can't feel at ease." Mr. Huang nodded in agreement, nephew Mu is right, this black-robed man must be driven out. Mr. Huang changed his tone and continued, however, the Dan Chamber of Commerce was established not long ago, and its foundation is weak, so uncle can't do anything to help you. However, if you need it, just say it, and uncle will find a way to get it for you. It is comfortable to deal with such smart people. Musian nodded and said, actually, I asked Sister Fei Ying for some medicinal herbs today. These are the relevant medicinal herbs needed to deal with the black-robed people when the time comes. After hearing this, Mr. Huang waved his hand and said, these medicinal herbs will be given to my nephew Mu. In addition, your uncle will prepare some gold for you as funds to deal with the black-robed people. Musian shook his head and said, gold is not necessary, but I need some spiritual stones. As he said this, he inadvertently glanced at the heroic president of the Chamber of Commerce. If gold and silver are the tickets in the world, then spiritual stones are the silver tickets in the world of immortal cultivation. These spiritual stones are different from gold and silver. They can all be immediately purified and taken into the body as spiritual energy. Therefore, for those cultivators, the importance of spiritual stones is far more precious than gold and silver. Of course, gold and silver naturally have their advantages. At least among the people only recognize these gold, silver, and jewelry. Mr. Wang's eyes flickered, and he said to himself thoughtfully, spirit stones, I wonder how many spirit stones does my nephew Mu want? 50,000. Musian compared a number. Under normal circumstances, even the salary of disciples of those large sects is only 3,000 or 2,000 spirit stones a month. According to Musian's psychological expectations, the number of spirit stones that Mr. Huang can afford should not exceed 50,000. However, Mr. Huang still shook his head. No, it's too little. He looked up at Musian and said seriously, I'll give you 100,000 spirit stones. Musian was slightly stunned. For a moment, he didn't understand the way of the president of the Morning 11 Chamber of Commerce. Not only did the other party not lower the price, but he doubled it. He shook his head and said, the man in black robe is not worth the price. But nephew Mu, it is worth the price. Mr. Huang put down his teacup and smiled, you should know that I am a businessman. I am not very interested in power. It is enough to be able to live in a corner. As for the matter between you and the Gongsun family, or the Bai family, I am not interested and will not interfere. What this means is that I will pay the money that should be paid, and don't involve me in your disputes afterwards. I just want to make money in peace. Musian understood. I don't understand one thing, Musian said, since uncle doesn't want to get involved in the dispute, why would he cooperate with the Gongsun family and attack the Bai family? Mr. Huang shook his head, I have never used any force against the Bai family. In our industry, this is called a commercial war. In this case, Mr. Huang did not send people to attack the Bai family, at least from the information on the surface. What the Dan Chamber of Commerce really did was to suppress the Bai family's market in Tianqian City. Musian thought to himself. I will have someone send the spirit stones to the Mu family later, hoping that they can be auctioned for some use, Mr. Huang said with a smile. Uncle Huang is a wise man, Musian said sincerely. Mr. Huang laughed and put down his teacup. My nephew Mu is also a smart man. The two chatted for a while, and Mr. Huang suddenly changed his tone and said, the auction is still going on. If you don't mind, my nephew can go and have a look. Today, Miss Fei Ying is hosting it. He knew that Musian had some feelings for Fei Ying in the past, but Mr. Huang didn't want to offend the auctioneer too much. With Fei Ying's ability, it is not difficult to switch to other auction chambers of commerce. And the most important thing is that because of some forces behind Fei Ying, Mr. Huang can't take any revenge after she changes jobs. Merchants pay attention to interests. If they damage their own interests after taking action against someone, they will consider whether they should be happy for a while. This is the case with the 100,000 spirit stones given to Musian, and the same is true for Fei Ying. Well, that's true. Since we're here, let's go take a look. Musian nodded. Mr. Huang smiled and nodded, saying, but be careful, don't do anything bad to Miss Fei Ying. Otherwise, if there is any problem, your uncle won't be able to solve it. After all, Fei Ying has a sister behind her. She is a disciple of Lianji sect. And it is said that she has been promoted to the level of inner disciples. Lianji section. Just this identity is enough to make people afraid. The elders of Lianji sect will naturally not use their hands to suppress others casually. But you have to know that being in Lianji sect means connections. If you offend Fei Ying, you may offend a large number of people. Mr. Huang knows this very well. Musian smiled and nodded, I know. He knows this better than anyone else. Generally speaking, killing one person is basically equivalent to offending a group of people. Killing a person will make a father appear, and killing the other person's father may make a grandfather, great-grandfather, or even great-grandfather appear. Even in the world of immortals, people have to be polite. For example, the protagonists who killed people but were not killed are because they are the chosen ones, born with great luck and not easy to die. Generally speaking, if the realm is too different, how can you kill someone and let you run away? Under the guidance of the maid, Musian came to the auction site and sat down in the box that had been prepared. Compared with the hustle and bustle outside, the space here is obviously more spacious and comfortable. However, as soon as he sat down, Musian's eyes suddenly fell on those who were attending the auction outside. Among those people, he saw an old acquaintance. Yeah, you. What a coincidence. Musian smiled and thought to himself, is it possible that I am born to be in conflict with the protagonist? Although it was just a coincidence, it gave people the feeling that God was taking all kinds of detours to let Yayu step on him, a supporting role, to get to the top. In front of the high platform, the charming Fei Ying looked around at everyone, and said in a soft voice. The item auctioned below is quite special. It is said that it is a fragment of a weapon of a great man in ancient times. Although it looks rusty now, maybe in the future, we can find a way to use it to create a magic weapon. Musian looked carefully and saw the latest item stored in front of the high platform. It was a bronze piece that looked quite ordinary, with complex patterns engraved on it, but it looked tattered. People's eyes immediately lost interest. If it weren't for Fei Ying's hosting, some people would probably have shouted RNM return the money or something like that. After all, they didn't come to the auction to see such broken things. Starting price, 100 spirit stones. After Fei Ying finished speaking, the venue was completely silent, and no one followed her. This was within Fei Ying's expectations, and she still looked at the people in the audience with a charming smile. After all, these people still don't understand the value of this bronze piece, although it looks like just a piece of scrap copper and iron. According to the investigation of her subordinates, this bronze piece may really be a fragment of a weapon of a powerful person in ancient times. 100 spirit stones can be said to be no different from giving it away for free. If this bronze piece can be integrated into a weapon in the future, it will be a priceless treasure. Even if it can't be integrated into a weapon, it can also be collected as a treasure. It's just a pity that there is no one in the venue who knows the value of it. 150 spirit stones. At this time, a calm voice of a young man suddenly came from the audience. Fei Ying looked in the direction of the voice with a little surprise. It's that waste of the Ye family. I heard recently that he has cultivated to the peak of refining essence in just a few months. He is an absolute genius. There are still people who know what is good. The Chongsam sisters' charming eyes are full of admiration. Yeah, you couldn't help feeling a little proud when he noticed Fei Ying's gaze, but he still looked calm. However, when he stared at the bronze piece, his eyes were filled with a fiery heat that was hard to conceal. The old man who had just fallen asleep in his body told him that this bronze piece was a good thing, he must find a way to get it. Fortunately, no one in the venue found it, otherwise it would be troublesome. 150 spirit stones, is there anyone who can offer a higher price? Fei Ying looked around at everyone, waited for a moment, and said, 150 spirit stones at a time. 500 spirit stones. At this time, a voice suddenly sounded from a box. The atmosphere in the whole venue seemed to stagnate for a moment, and Ye Yu was also stunned, turning his head subconsciously to look. Although he couldn't see the other person's face, he knew who it was just by hearing the voice. Musian. As Musian's offer fell, the atmosphere in the auction hall suddenly became a little more subtle. People all recognized the identity of the owner of the box, and at this time, they all looked at Ye Yu with ambiguous eyes. These people more or less knew that Musian and Ye Yu had a bad relationship, and the reason why Musian was bidding with Ye Yu was probably to retaliate against him. It's him again. Ye Yu looked at the box that was bidding, with a hint of anger in his eyes. However, Musian, who was leisurely drinking tea and enjoying the massage of the maid in the box, naturally didn't know these things. Even if he knew, he wouldn't care. Anyway, he only needed to know one thing. What Ye Yu wanted, must be a good thing.